He wasn't sure what he expected when the knock came at his apartment door, but it certainly wasn't a humanoid alien with iridescent green skin, 6 eyes blinking in perfect synchronization, and a notebook the size of a dinner tray. She introduced herself in a voice that was both musical and oddly clinical, claiming she was conducting a field study of human habits, and that he had been randomly selected as a subject. He blinked, unsure if he should be flattered or terrified. Before he could respond, she had already stepped inside, ignoring the polite rules about shoes and personal space, and began examining his surroundings as if every couch cushion were a specimen. "I must record everything with precision," she said, flipping open her notebook and scribbling furiously. "Every object, every behavior. It is a test of human efficiency, comfort, and hygiene. You will cooperate fully, of course." He coughed awkwardly, trying to hide his growing discomfort. Sure, I guess. What does that entail?" Her expression was unreadable. Or perhaps it was just alien, and then, almost gleefully, she asked him to demonstrate brushing his teeth. He stared. "My teeth?" "Yes. Oral hygiene is fundamental. Scientific accuracy is critical. Please proceed." He picked up his toothbrush like it was a ticking bomb. She circled him, notebook in hand, eyes wide as if every motion he made could reveal some hidden pattern. She leaned slightly closer than necessary when he squeezed the toothpaste, commenting on the texture and consistency with a level of seriousness that made him blush. Her 6 eyes seemed to study his facial expressions like she was decoding an alien puzzle, and the more he tried to remain composed, the more he realized she was enjoying this. "Interesting," she murmured, jotting down a note. "Note the efficiency of the human manual dexterity. Observe the toothpaste coverage across the enamel surface. Heart rate remains stable, minimal blush, remarkable." He swallowed nervously. "Thanks. I think." From there, the tests became increasingly absurd. Breakfast was next. She demanded he toast bread in various ways and eat it while describing the taste in exacting detail. She asked him to chew slowly, then quickly, then to attempt a combination of both. Each time, she leaned just a little too close, scribbling notes, occasionally making murmurs that sounded suspiciously like approval of his jaw movement. When he asked if he could just eat normally, she tilted her head in confusion. "Normal eating is irrelevant. We are testing response variability and behavioral patterns under controlled stimuli. This is essential for the study." By the time he reached the couch, she was already measuring the firmness of every cushion. She insisted he sit in multiple positions, noting how each one affected his posture and comfort levels. She pressed him to lean, recline, even to curl up as if he were a lab rat in a very polite, very disturbing experiment. Each position was meticulously documented, often with commentary on how his body responded to pressure points and gravity. He couldn't help but notice her glances lingered just a little too long on his arms, his chest, the curve of his neck. "You blush when you adjust posture." "Fascinating," she said, eyes wide. "This could be indicative of subconscious stress responses or—" She paused, scribbling furiously. "Curiosity-related stimuli." He coughed again, feeling heat rise in his ears. Right, stress?" Her face tilted closer, 6 eyes inspecting him simultaneously, and she murmured, "Or perhaps something more biologically significant. We shall see." Every step was a mix of comedy and humiliation. He tried to explain human norms. Some things aren't tests, some actions are private. She nodded sagely, taking notes all the same, occasionally demonstrating behaviors herself with dramatic flair to model correct procedure, which mostly involved her brushing her own teeth at an exaggerated pace or testing the softness of the couch with her whole body pressed against it in ways that left him mortified and slightly distracted. When she moved on to testing his reaction to ambient temperature, he thought it couldn't get worse. She adjusted thermostats, fanned him with pieces of cardboard, and sprinkled ice in his drinking glass, all while observing micro-expressions on his face. Each movement, no matter how mundane, was catalogued in that enormous notebook with obsessive dedication. And throughout it all, she kept repeating, This is purely scientific. Purely. I must remain objective. My curiosity is only for research purposes. But her occasional smirks, the way her gaze lingered just a fraction too long, and the subtle tilt of her head when he flinched or coughed suggested otherwise. It was hard for him to focus on anything but the feeling that this test was a pretext, a playful excuse for her to get close and observe him in ways no one ever had. By the time she suggested the next stage of the test, which she cryptically described as personal comfort evaluation, he realized he was completely unprepared. She handed him a clipboard with a checklist that included things like sitting cross-legged, lying down, and physical proximity reactions. Each item was accompanied by an alien symbol he didn't understand. He swallowed, nervously adjusting his shirt, and wondered if he should run, hide, or simply resign himself to the fact that his day had taken a turn into the absurd. She smiled, well, as much as a six-eyed alien could smile, and said, "Do not worry. All will be documented. Objectivity is paramount. But I am very curious about your human reactions." And just like that, he knew his life had officially become a comedy of errors, awkwardness, and something he wasn't quite ready to name, but which was clearly beginning to stir with every meticulous observation she made. He tried to convince himself that the next test would be simple, routine, purely observational. After all, she had repeatedly assured him that her intentions were strictly scientific. Yet when she announced that the next phase involved comfort efficiency evaluation, his stomach sank. She gestured toward the couch with a serious expression, notebook in hand, as if preparing to conduct a complex experiment on human anatomy. "Please demonstrate full reclining capacity. Observe every micro-adjustment for optimal posture," she instructed, eyes glinting with a mixture of seriousness and unmistakable curiosity. He hesitated, then slowly leaned back, trying to maintain dignity while she measured angles, distances, and reactions as though he were an elaborate human-shaped protractor. Her 6 eyes followed his every twitch and shift, recording minute changes in muscle tension and body alignment. "Interesting," she murmured, scribbling rapidly. "The distribution of body weight across the lumbar region indicates a high potential for relaxation-induced endorphin release. Heart rate is stable, but micro-blushing is present. Fascinating." He swallowed, suddenly very aware of the warmth rising to his cheeks. Thanks?" She didn't look up from her notes. Instead, she instructed him to shift sideways, then rotate slightly, testing every possible angle. When he tried to rise, she placed a gentle, if firm, hand on his arm. "Remain stationary. Observation is critical for data integrity." He froze, unsure whether to protest or comply, and that hesitation earned him another scribble in her notebook. She leaned just a fraction closer, her face tilting in a way that made his pulse spike despite her insistence on scientific rigor. Every word she spoke remained formal and clinical, yet there was a faint musical undertone in her voice that sent his imagination running in places it shouldn't have. After exhausting couch configurations, she moved on to human reaction to touch stimuli. He blinked at her. "Touch stimuli?" "Correct. For complete evaluation of comfort and behavioral response, I require a tactile baseline." Before he could clarify, she lightly tapped his shoulder, then his forearm, meticulously noting every micro-reaction. Each touch seemed minor, but under her intense scrutiny, he felt exposed, analyzed, and absurdly flustered. His hands went to his lap, trying to hide the fact that his body wasn't entirely indifferent to the attention. She tilted her head, scribbled furiously, and whispered, "Curious, this reaction may indicate subconscious attraction or heightened stress levels. Further testing required." "Further testing?" he repeated nervously. "Yes. Please lie down. Horizontal observation is necessary for full comprehension of human relaxation mechanics." He hesitated again, but her expectant gaze made him comply. As he reclined, she adjusted his limbs for accuracy, hands hovering just long enough to make him blush violently. Her commentary was relentless, cataloging reactions to every minor shift in position, every subtle change in expression. He couldn't tell if she was truly fascinated by human biology, or if she simply enjoyed watching him squirm. You blush more intensely when adjusting posture than when responding to tactile stimuli, she said matter-of-factly, scribbling more notes. Micro-expressions indicate heightened curiosity or something else. Additional observation required. He tried to protest, but even his voice sounded weak, betraying the tension he felt. Her alien logic allowed her to interpret any hesitation, any flinch, as data, and she leaned closer, curiosity sparking in every one of her 6 eyes. At one point, she held his hand under the guise of checking circulation. He froze, heart racing, while she studied his fingers with exaggerated concentration. Fascinating, she said softly. Blood flow, temperature variance, emotional stress indicators. All optimal. Human physiology is most instructive. He nearly choked on his own laughter, caught between embarrassment and the absurdity of the situation. Every measurement, every touch, every whispered observation seemed designed to make him aware of how ridiculous he must appear, and how impossible it was to remain composed. Then she asked something that made his stomach drop entirely. Please demonstrate a human romantic gesture. Purely for data collection, of course. Authenticity is critical. What? He sputtered, eyes wide. Yes. Demonstration of affection or attraction under controlled conditions. Observe your partners. She paused, scribbling furiously. Reaction to culturally normative romantic behavior. He stammered. I'm alone, so. That is irrelevant. Imagination and enactment are equally instructive. He blinked at her, completely bewildered, while she leaned closer, notebook at the ready, her gaze both analytical and unmistakably mischievous. The air was thick with tension, embarrassment, and a faint sense of something more thrilling than either of them had expected. She instructed him to smile, gesture warmly, and enact a typical human charm ritual, all while she recorded pulse changes, micro-blushing, and subtle muscular contractions. By the time the romantic simulation ended, he was flushed, sweaty, and oddly exhilarated. She clapped her hands softly, looking genuinely thrilled. Excellent. Data integrity intact. Curiosity metrics are off the charts. Fascinating. He slumped back, feeling absurdly vulnerable, aware of every glance, every scribble, every subtle lean she took toward him. And as she leaned back herself, notebook clasped tightly to her chest, he caught a hint of a smirk that betrayed just how little of this was truly about science. Every action, every bizarre request, every flustered reaction from him seemed to entertain her far more than the data itself. He realized with a mixture of horror and intrigue that this was no ordinary test. It was a playful, over-the-top exploration of human intimacy through the lens of her unfiltered curiosity. And somehow, despite the embarrassment and absurdity, he couldn't deny a growing thrill at her relentless attention, her peculiar fascination, and the unmistakable, if awkward, tension simmering between them. Every touch, every note, every half-serious instruction made it impossible to tell where science ended and flirtation began, leaving him both nervous and hopelessly intrigued. By the end of the session, he was acutely aware that he had just spent an hour being studied, measured, touched, and teased by an alien who claimed it was all for science, but whose eyes, gestures, and constant curiosity suggested something much more personal. And for some inexplicable reason, he couldn't stop thinking about what the next test would entail. He thought he had reached the limits of embarrassment and absurdity, but the alien had other plans. She arrived that afternoon with a gleaming smile, notebook in hand, and a twinkle in her 6 eyes that spelled trouble. Today we advance to the next phase, she announced, her tone both formal and teasing. Human intimacy and reaction measurement. He froze mid-breath, certain he had misheard, but she was already pulling out a set of small instruments and a diagram that looked suspiciously like a map of human anatomy. Intimacy is a vital component of human behavior. Complete observation is required for full comprehension. Objectivity remains paramount, she said, though the sparkle in her eyes suggested objectivity might be optional. He tried to protest, but she waved him off with a flourish. Do not worry. All actions are data. Compliance ensures accuracy. Non-compliance introduces error. Please proceed to the demonstration station. Before he could even process what that meant, she had him standing awkwardly in the middle of the room, where she instructed him to perform basic gestures, simple acts of friendliness, even flirtation, under the guise of behavioral calibration. He hesitated, and she stepped closer, tapping his shoulder to adjust his posture. Every tap sent shivers down his spine, and he could feel the heat creeping up his neck and chest. Observe your reactions, she said, scribbling notes. Particularly micro-blushing, micro-shifting, and subtle inhalations. These are indicators of emotional engagement, or attraction. He stammered, trying to explain that most humans didn't monitor their facial expressions while blushing, but she simply ignored him. She had already moved on to more invasive observations, asking him to remove his jacket for temperature regulation efficiency, and later his shirt for muscle tone evaluation. He hesitated, realizing that his privacy had evaporated entirely, but the insistence in her voice and the gleam of curiosity in her eyes left him no choice. As he complied, she leaned in closer, jotting notes furiously while murmuring about pulse rate, skin temperature, and posture dynamics. He tried to focus on the absurdity of the situation to keep his composure, but every touch, every accidental brush, every lingering glance made it nearly impossible. Interesting, she whispered. Heart rate elevates disproportionately when skin is exposed. Reaction indicates heightened awareness, perhaps even desire. He choked on his own breath, and she tilted her head, intrigued by his sudden awkward shift. Fascinating. Further demonstration required. The next series of tests was even more ridiculous. She instructed him to simulate a romantic gesture, something as simple as offering a hypothetical flower, but with exaggerated instructions: smile just enough, angle your hand precisely, tilt your head at the correct degree. Each minor misstep earned a scribble in her notebook, accompanied by a soft comment like, adjustment required, micro-expression incongruent with intention. When he finally attempted what he thought was an acceptable performance, she clapped her hands softly, murmuring, exquisite. Human emotion conveyed effectively. Observational data, invaluable. Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer than necessary, and he felt a strange flutter in his chest. Then she moved on to what she called tactile response evaluation. Light touches for pulse checks, gentle nudges to test reaction times, and adjustments under the guise of accuracy improvement left him squirming. She recorded every flinch, every twitch, and every subtle glance with meticulous attention, and he couldn't help noticing that she seemed to be enjoying his discomfort far more than any scientific measure would justify. He stumbled through the exercises, embarrassed and flustered, while she leaned in close, inspecting his reactions with what could only be described as gleeful curiosity. Every accidental touch, every brush of her hand against his, made him aware of his own responses in ways he wasn't prepared for. You blush again, she said, almost cheerfully. Fascinating. Curiosity metrics indicate continued interest. Micro-expressions confirm engagement. Let us proceed to advanced simulation. His heart pounded. Advanced simulation sounded like a nightmare dressed in scientific jargon. She instructed him to lie down for posture observation while she circled him, hands hovering just over his body to measure imaginary parameters. He tried to hold still, but every slight movement caused her to scribble furiously. When he adjusted his arms slightly, she leaned in and murmured, micro-adjustment noted, potential attraction indicator. His face heated, and he realized he could no longer tell if this was science or flirtation, or both. Each note, each glance, each deliberate misinterpretation of his natural reactions blurred the line entirely. He felt simultaneously scrutinized and admired, embarrassed and strangely exhilarated. By the end of the session, she had managed to extract laughter, blushes, and awkwardness in equal measure. She closed her notebook with a flourish, looking at him with an intensity that suggested she had not only observed human behavior but thoroughly enjoyed every moment of it. Data collection complete for now, she announced. Your responses have been exemplary. Curiosity metrics off the charts. Human biology is truly instructive. He sank onto the couch, breathless, wondering how he had survived an hour of what could only be described as a full-scale alien study of his every reaction. And yet, despite the embarrassment, he couldn't help but feel a strange anticipation for what she would do next, knowing that her curiosity, and perhaps her amusement, was far from satisfied. Her 6 eyes sparkled as she observed him catching his breath, scribbling one last note. Do not be concerned. Objectivity maintained, mostly. But continued observation may be enjoyable for both parties. He groaned, both dreading and secretly hoping for the next absurd, intimate, and hilariously uncomfortable session that would blur the lines between science, curiosity, and something far more personal. By the time she returned the next evening, he was already on edge, half dreading the next test, and half curiously anticipating what absurdity she might unleash. She entered with her usual precision, notebook in hand, yet there was a spark in her eyes that went beyond the clinical. Tonight we conclude preliminary observation, she announced, her voice carrying that same musical lilt that made him nervous. We will document final curiosity reactions. He swallowed, suddenly hyper-aware of every movement he made. She gestured toward the couch, then the floor, and then finally to a spot in the center of the room. Please remain stationary for baseline observation. He obeyed, heart thumping in his chest. She circled him slowly, notebook poised, examining him from every angle. Her gaze lingered on his face, his hands, the subtle tension in his shoulders. Curiosity metrics indicate elevated interest, she murmured to herself. Then she glanced up at him with a mischievous smile. Perhaps it is time to abandon pretense. I admit, my curiosity is no longer purely scientific. He froze, processing her words. Wait, what? I have observed your reactions, she continued, scribbling quickly. And I find them instructive in ways that data cannot capture. Your responses are stimulating in multiple senses. Truly, human behavior is fascinating, but so are you personally. He blinked, caught between shock, embarrassment, and an unexpected thrill. She leaned closer under the guise of checking his pulse for accuracy purposes, and he felt a shiver run through him. The playful scientific pretense she had maintained now dissolved into something more tangible. Her hands hovered near him, lightly touching his arm, his shoulder, occasionally brushing against him. For observational purposes. Though the glance she gave him said everything she didn't bother to hide. Do you enjoy these tests? She asked softly, 6 eyes flicking over him with unreadable intensity. He hesitated, then admitted, I guess sometimes. His words sounded weak even to him, but the truth was undeniable. The absurdity, the awkwardness, and the relentless attention had stirred feelings he couldn't fully articulate. She smiled, leaning even closer, almost conspiratorially. Excellent. Authentic reactions are most valuable. And it pleases me that your curiosity aligns with mine. What followed was a series of interactions that were equal parts absurd and intimate. She guided him through exaggerated demonstrations of human closeness, her commentary deadpan and scientific, while her actions were increasingly playful. She asked him to simulate minor affectionate gestures, a handshake that lingered a second too long, a mock hug, even a fleeting brush of shoulders. Each time, she catalogued reactions with the seriousness of a researcher, though her eyes betrayed delight and amusement. He found himself laughing at the ridiculousness of it all while simultaneously blushing at her attention. Every touch, every glance, every whispered comment made him acutely aware of both his vulnerability and the growing tension between them. She was relentless, meticulously noting heart rate changes, blushes, subtle muscular responses, and even the cadence of his laughter, all while insisting it was strictly for data. Then she decided to escalate, always under the guise of observation. For comprehensive evaluation, physical proximity is required. Please lie down on the couch. This is purely to measure relaxation and human response. He hesitated, then complied, lying down while she knelt beside him, her notebook poised. She adjusted his posture with delicate, almost teasing hands, commenting on tension in his shoulders, the curve of his spine, the subtle reaction of his muscles. Every touch, every adjustment, was meticulous and clinical, yet the intimacy was undeniable. He found himself caught in the strange overlap of embarrassment, arousal, and amusement. "Your reactions are remarkable," she said softly, leaning in close enough that he could feel her breath. "Curiosity data confirmed, but also personal fascination confirmed." He laughed nervously, heart racing, realizing he had been entirely ensnared by the mix of her literal scientific approach and the playful, flirtatious undercurrent she never tried to hide. Every comment she made, every note she took, every subtle touch seemed designed to provoke both laughter and tension, and it worked perfectly. The evening continued with small, intimate experiments under her strict, scientific pretense, brushing a hand against his, observing micro-flinches, comparing pulse before and after laughter, and even simulating romantic gestures for data accuracy. Each exercise was absurdly funny yet charged with tension, her curiosity fully exposed, her attraction undeniable. By the time she finally closed her notebook and leaned back, she looked at him with an expression that was no longer about tests or science. "Your human responses, delightful. Most instructive. And enjoyable in ways I did not anticipate. Curiosity, satisfied." He smiled, breathless, a mixture of relief and lingering anticipation coursing through him. He realized that her curiosity had never truly been about data alone. It had been about discovering him, his reactions, his quirks, his humanity, and she had done so with relentless, playful precision. She stood, brushing imaginary dust from her notebook, and added with a mischievous glint, "Further observation may be required, for personal research." He laughed, both nervously and genuinely, realizing that his life had become a chaotic blend of comedy, embarrassment, and unexpected attraction. And for the first time, he wasn't entirely opposed to it. He couldn't deny that her curiosity, wild, invasive, and utterly relentless, had awakened something in him, and he found himself looking forward to the absurd, intimate, and unpredictable moments that were still to come. For all the blushing, awkward movements, and ridiculous instructions, he realized something astonishing: he was genuinely fascinated by her too. The alien had entered his life under the guise of science, and in the process, had turned it into a comedic, adult exploration of curiosity, attraction, and unexpected intimacy. And in that moment, both of them knew that the tests were far from over, they had only just begun.